Thank you very much for coming to the Parents and Caregivers as Partners Conference and for signing up for this workshop. As I said, I'm going to challenge some of the things that we traditionally know or think about school councils. I'm Nancy Angevine Sands. I'm a former teacher, but for the last 15 years, I have been working as a consultant through my company with Equal Step. And I work with school councils, teachers, pre-teaching and community to find effective ways of engaging families and caregivers in their children's education. I just want to begin with our conversation agreement. I ask you to please stay engaged. I suspect you may feel some discomfort in some of the things that I say. Please sit with that. Speak your truth when we open it up, and let's all agree to expect and accept non-disclosure from the participants in this group. Two terms I want to define before we begin are whiteness and white privilege. They'll come up a little bit in the presentation. Whiteness refers to the ideology that white identity is the ideal and is viewed as the norm, where other identities are seen as subcultures within the society. And white privilege refers to a certain set of rights and advantages, exemptions, and immunities that are available primarily to white persons of European ancestry. And the degree to which white privilege is available to be enjoyed may depend on a particular government's social, cultural, political, and economic content at the time. I work from the base that white privilege defines much of the systemic ways that education works, both within the broader system and even right down to school cultures. So what have we learned from COVID other than Zoom meetings can be good and bad? Dr. Ann Ishimuro says that we've learned that parent-caregiver engagement is centered in the school. Everything comes out from the school to the families, but the school is not always the center for our families. And we have to consider that in the work that we do in councils. If everything is school-centric rather than family-centric, what are we missing? And Dr. Ann Henderson says that what we've also learned is that there are inequities in our system that are causing parental worries. Some of them are race-based, and others are even low socioeconomic students. Their families are worrying that they're falling behind. Special education students, their families are worried that they won't get adequate support and that they've lost a lot in the last 19 months. And racialized families and low SES families worry about the impact that the assumptions and biases of staff and even school council members may have on how they work with and see their families and what they're doing. We all want to get back to normal, but what I'm hoping to put forward today is that normal didn't always work for everybody. So traditionally, engagement, as I think I've said, has been a school-centric practice. It centers in the school. Everybody, the community comes into the school might send stuff out, but it's about coming back in. And it looks like volunteering in the classroom or at school council activities, which are usually about fundraising. It's about the school or the school council communicating with families, and that communication quite often is one directional, in which case it's not a dialogue, it's a monologue. It usually centers for teachers around homework. If the parents are helping with homework, well, then they're engaged. And schools think that if they have their school councils up and running, then they've got engagement and they're working well. But what we do know is that traditional engagement, school-centric practice, can contribute to an alienating environment for our working class families and our families of color. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this in different ways as we go along. What are we doing as a school? What are we doing as a school council that is making our families feel uncomfortable? Traditionally, engagement and practices have been based on the study of white middle-class families. The study of family engagement goes back at least 5 decades. And over that time, they have looked at how school groups, PTAs in the States, home and schools up here, and school councils, how do they engage with their families? And then from that, they have developed, okay, this is what works, this is what works. But the problem has been that most of the groups they've looked at have been white middle-class families, families that understand the system, that have social capital, which I'm going to talk about later, that know what's going on. And the results of this is that we have devalued the ways that marginalized families engage. And the benefits of engagement have come primarily to the dominant families in the school. And that research continues to this day, where we have seen, and I mean, I could go on a lot about it, but where research is showing that schools sometimes don't want to argue too much with what the white families in their PTAs or their school councils are saying, because those guys are raising money for them and they want the money to do the things that maybe their budget won't allow. So we have to just keep this in the back of our mind. Is what we're doing school-centric or is it family-centric? And all of this leads to talking about the hard to reach. And I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. Oh, they're hard to reach. Oh, we sent stuff out to them and they just didn't reply. They didn't come. I hear that from school councils. I hear that from teachers. But we have to ask ourselves, who's hard to reach? Is it the family or is it the school? And the racial disparities that we see in education are very often contributed to a lack of parental involvement. Even when we hear about the achievement gap, and you may have heard about that, the achievement gap, that's a certain sector of our families, their kids don't achieve, we have to do things for them. That is blaming the family. And instead of looking at the system, instead of looking at the racism, which we have centuries of evidence in the racialized families, what we should be looking at instead is what some are calling the opportunity gap or the education debt. What do we owe to our families that are on the margins, that are not that we aren't contacting, that we aren't hearing from, and how can we help them so that they can engage more successfully with their kids? So I want to emphasize here that research is proving to us that racialized families do in fact engage with their children and engage with their kids' education, but most often they do it in the home. And the interesting thing is that research also tells us that when families engage in their kids' education in the home, that is what has a significant effect on their ability to achieve and to do well within school. You can get as involved as you want in school fairs, in raising money, but it doesn't have the effect that engaging your families in learning in the home has. And I say this all the time in my workshops. Please, somebody find me the research that says that fundraising helps student achievement, because I have looked and I can't find it. We also know from research that racialized families who do engage in the school, who are involved, who do volunteer in the classroom, quite often they're volunteering to protect their children from racist practice and microaggressions that are happening. We also know that the way families view curriculum and how it should be taught can affect their engagement. So my friend, Dr. Max Anthony Newman, wrote an interesting paper. Now, it was based on white immigrant families from Eastern Europe. So these are white families, part of the dominant culture. But what he found is what they expected from where they went to school, what they expected in learning and engagement wasn't what they found here. And they didn't understand. One mother said to him, explain to me how buying a cupcake at a bake sale is going to help my daughter do well in school, right? So we have to think about that as school council leaders. What sort of education do we have to do with our families? How can we help them to understand that how we engage with our families in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada has some validity behind it, and that it can help in numerous ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about how what we need to do to find that out. So I found this in a webinar that I was on, and I thought that it really spoke to me. If we aren't strengthening our families as school councils, if we aren't strengthening them, then what are we doing? What are we doing? It's our families that need to be supported. It's our families that need to be strengthened. Parent-caregiver engagement must be relational. Number one, if we don't have relationships, good relationships with our families, we're going nowhere. So it's about getting out there. It's about talking to them. It's about getting to know them and them getting to know us. The activities that we do as a council should be linked to learning in some way. And they should be building the capabilities of our parents and caregivers to support learning and to support their child. And that's at different levels. In public school, in elementary school, it looks different than in middle school and high school. Okay, in middle school and high school, it's more of being a coach. Have you got everything you need? Here's a place where you can do your work. Let's look at how you can plan your options for next year. At elementary school, it's more about connecting with what they're learning and how can you support that at home. So when you are looking at activities to do as a council, I would ask that at least two of these three things play a major role in that activity. Is it relational? Is it linked to learning? Or is it building the capabilities of our parents and caregivers? So I want to take a moment and I want you to think about this question. In your child's life from JK until they graduate from grade 12, what percentage of their life is spent asleep? What percentage of their life is spent at school? And what percentage of their life is spent doing other things? And you can either put the answer in chat or actually just turn on your mic and shout out what you think. What percentage of their life is spent asleep, at school, and away? Any guesses? I'm not hearing anything. I don't know if people are saying anything. I can't seem to get my chat. See,
sorry, I'm trying to type, but my 4-year-old is grabbing my arm. So I'm doing it one-handed, waiting for my husband to get home from the dentist.
You're unmuted now, so just say.
I think that most of their time is at school and then the rest of the time is asleep. As a working parent, I see my kids like a couple hours a day. So, I know that a lot of their time is at school. Like they're there, I don't even know how many hours because my children are in the before and after care as well.
Okay.
And I mentioned in the chat, I'm the daughter of an elementary school teacher. So I spent a lot of my life growing up in school. And so, yeah, I think the greatest percentage is definitely school and then asleep if we're also lucky.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'm going to give you the answer. Brace yourself. 33% of their time is spent asleep. 17% of their time is spent at school, and 50% of their time is spent away. Now, I will say this includes summer holidays and weekends. It's their entire life. But 17% is spent in school. And I have seen, depending on the school district and how many days a year they are in school, it as low as 13%. So we need to ask ourselves, if our families are not engaged in their children's learning, we're not taking an advantage of a really important opportunity. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, I'm going to give you a little activity to do right now. Give you a second to get your paper and pen ready. I would like you to draw a circle. And I'm just going to say, if we were in a room together, I would not be giving you any more information than I am right now. All right. So I would like you to draw a circle on your paper. I would like you to draw a triangle. Now, please put a square in the corner. And finally, write your name. All right. I asked you to draw a circle, to put draw a triangle, to put a square in the corner, and to write your name. How many of you drew something that looks exactly like this? I'm going to guess from the in-person times that I've done this, very few, if any. And I do this because I want you to consider communication. I said that relationships are where engagement begins and ends. We can't have relationships if we don't have communication. And quite often, as councils and as teachers, we send things out into our community, and it's pretty clear to us what we wanted and what we meant. But is it clear to the people that we sent it to? Do they understand what we're asking? Do they understand what we're saying? And I'm not just talking about language barriers, because that's a big one, about translation and interpretation. That's another conversation. But do they understand what we're getting at? What is important to us? And when we hear back from our families, do we understand what they're saying? Do we stop and really deeply listen to what they're telling us? So if you, whether your school, I was going to say, if you're struggling with a council and you're struggling to engage your families, as I asked at the beginning, but even if you get 25 or 30 people out at every meeting, I'm asking you to not only build communications with them, but this year start to look at how you're communicating with your families. Is it two-way? Is it a dialogue? And when you hear back from the families, is that affecting what you're doing, what your goals and objectives are? Or are you just, oh yeah, they said that, and then you just go on with what you're doing? We have to start listening to our families. So what's the difference between engagement and contact? Because a lot of what we do is what I would call contact. Engagement is planned. We've planned our goals. We have set our objectives for the year. We've planned our activities. It's, as I said, it's relational and it's linked to learning, and it spans over a period of time and years. Whereas contact is not planned, it's not linked to learning, it happens accidentally to fulfill a need. Now, I want to emphasize that contact isn't bad, all right? It's not bad. Sometimes contact is the key to building those relationships. It's the key to making people feel comfortable so that they will talk to you and they will share things with you. But you need to begin to ask yourself, is this engagement or is it contact? A lot of times when I work with teachers, oh yeah, I engage with my school, with my families. I send home a newsletter once a month. No, that's contact. How are you engaging them? So finally, I'm going to get to some strategies that you can use as a council. Begin by, as I talked to you about communicating, begin by surveying your family for needs. What do they need, especially now, especially if you have some families that are still working remotely? In many parts of our city, we have families who have tech needs. They either don't have the technology they need, or they don't have the Wi-Fi they need, or they don't have enough of any of those. Do they have the materials that would be useful to them in engaging and learning at home? Do they have the skills? If they're holding down two or three jobs, do they have the time? And especially now in COVID, what's their well-being? How are they feeling? My kids are growing and they're out of the house. And I have been so stressed by COVID that I can't imagine how you guys are doing, holding down jobs, volunteering at your school, worrying about your kids. So it's about asking our families how they are. When you find out what they need, then that should guide what your councils will do. If you're finding that, you know what, I'm just not sure. A lot of them say, I'm not sure how to support mathematics at home. Then look at that, get it in, figure out, do you need to hold a workshop for if you're in elementary school, do you need workshops at the primary, the junior, the intermediate level in how to support those lessons at home? Could you run something, a Zoom call that just looks at well-being, that talks about relaxation or other items? Maybe you need, instead of buying books, and I'm going to repeat myself probably later on, instead of buying books for the school, maybe you need to buy books for your families. Maybe they don't have them, or you need to buy paper for your families or whatever, so that they can do things at home, arts and crafts materials. Also, find out from your families what's their preferred methods of communication. Do they want to hear an email? Do they get their information from the school website? Does the school or the council have a Facebook page and they get it from that? Do they like WhatsApp? Some of our communities really like WhatsApp. How do they communicate, and when do they like to hear from you the best? And be careful as a council. Don't be filling their inbox with stuff, because after a while, they're just going to stop listening. So make sure that families know when they hear from the school council, this is important. I need to go on to them. There's different ways of doing it. Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, in person. Don't stop. Even though we're in COVID, we're back in school. We can stay 6 feet apart. You can still talk to your families. You can still ask them face to face what they need, how they're doing. And if you have if you have any families that are still learning virtually, consider having a council committee that connects with those virtual families, that does outreach to them, to hear from them and what they need and what they're struggling with. And I want, above all, to urge you to go to the margins. When we send out surveys, we often hear from the same families. The same people are writing back and answering our questions. Those are the families that are already engaged or close to engaged, or feeling like, you know, there's a reason why I'll do this. I was on a webinar this summer with a group in Britain, and one of the presenters was saying that he knew a school that when they sent out surveys and they got the answers back, they looked at them and then they threw them out, because they probably figured they already knew what those people were thinking. They then had to figure out, how do we go to the margins? How do we go to the families we're not hearing from? Right? If a lot of your families live in apartment buildings, put notices up in the apartment buildings. If they go to a particular grocery store or pharmacy, ask the grocery store or the pharmacy, could I put a notice up here about our school council? Go to their places of worship, community centers, places where families hang out. Go to the margins and ask those families, what do they need? What are they struggling with? What skills do they need? How can you support them? I want that to be the phrase that you use this year. Go to the margins. So what can we do? In relationship building, a great way is learning circles. They've also been called listening circles. And you can schedule regularly scheduled Zoom meetings. Listen, some of you may hate Zoom. But one advantage of it is that I'm hearing back from councils that more parents are connecting with the school council. They're coming to school council meetings because it's easier, as you're finding out right now, to do it from their home. Even if the kids are playing around them or they're feeding them as they do it, they're at home. And so they will connect. And so not just meetings, but how can you do some listening circles, some learning circles, where once a month or twice a month, you have a topic and bring your cup of tea, bring your coffee, come and sit, let's just chat. Share your successes, talk about your challenges, learn from each other. Let the families learn. If you might have a guest speaker one day. It might be a teacher from the school or someone that you've gotten from the board. You don't have to go out and buy somebody to pay somebody to do this stuff, okay? Who's going to talk about a particular topic. But they can learn from you, but you can also learn from them. Listen deeply to what your families and caregivers are telling you. Where are they struggling? What are their needs? What don't they understand? And share that information with the principal, and also share what you've learned from your principals and teachers with your guests. And then let those learning circles guide your work throughout the year. And a little caveat that I have at the bottom, make sure there's a moderator for these meetings, and make sure this is going to be a tough job at the beginning. All right. And you may want, as I did at the beginning, you want to set out some rules for how we behave. A school council meeting, you cannot bring personal issues to the floor of a school council meeting. You can talk about general issues, but not personal issues. So I'm having a problem. The example I use all the time is I'm having a problem with the way my child's teacher is disciplining the class. So what could be discussed at council is how discipline is being seen and practiced within the school, and then what strategies they're using, and could any of those strategies be used in the home? How can we work together so the child is having the same message in both places? So that's sorry, I kind of digressed there, but it's the same for these learning circles, that this is a place to learn, not to complain. This is a place to ask and share. And as a moderator, you need to impart that to your participants. And if someone is not following that, and if they've been warned and they continue to complain, then it's within your right and purview for the safety of everyone else to remove them from that meeting. I talked at the beginning about social capital. Social capital is monetary capital is what we earn and the money that we have to pay for the things we need. Social capital is what we have in ourselves, our circle of friends, our family, our understanding of our world, our understanding to bring it to the schools and how it works, our understanding based on our experiences of learning. For our families that are new to TDSB, that are new to Ontario, their social capital has not been built up yet. They may not understand the system. They may not have made a circle of supportive friends that they can fall back on, that they can talk to, that they can rely on. As a school council, you can help by building the relationships with families. You can help to build up the social capital of all of your families. And it's not just our immigrant families. We have families that they went to school here too, but their social capital is low. How can we help that? We can do activities as a council remotely, online, group activities where maybe it's tonight we're going to talk about our favorite food and bring a dish that everybody likes and share the recipe with us. You can museums and galleries around the world have online tours. You could do that. With a picture that I have in the house, you could talk about creating an obstacle course in your home and share with families like how to do it and why they'd want to do it and what kids are learning from it. And then maybe build some while you're online. You can do social and emotional learning, explain to families about how board games and card games help to build a social and emotional learning of our students, because we recognize from their actions how they're doing with patience and cooperation, what they do when they get stressed. It's a way to for families to understand that what they're doing at home, learning isn't just about schooling. All right. Learning is everything that we do with our kids. It's going for a walk, it's cooking a dish, it's making an obstacle course, it's playing a card game, it's playing a game that is part of your culture. And then, of course, the arts. Listening to music and having a discussion about whose is best. A number of years ago, my son wanted to have a contest with my husband, and the question was, who is a better artist, John Lennon or Eminem? Today, my son would probably say Common, but and they had an argument, and they played the different song. They chose a couple of songs each. They looked at the lyrics and had a discussion about whose artist was best. You could do that in an online thing with your families. Reading a book. We know from research that reading is the #1 strategy for student achievement. So maybe you could have a book club. Maybe you could hold a couple of book clubs depending on the age of your students. Maybe you could bring in a teacher to do a little session on different ways of reading, different ways of questioning, things to look for when the kids are reading, what you can do. Or just discussing a book together is a wonderful way of building those connections with families. And encourage your families to bring in stories from their cultures, bring in stories that they grew up liking and learning. I remember my son is a teacher as well, and he taught in the Arctic for a year, and I went up to visit, and the school board there was doing a practice where they were looking at Western fairy tales, and they were asking the elders, were there any Inuit tales that sort of matched the message that were in those tales? That is a fabulous thing that a school council could do. Here are some fairy tales from the Western things, Western cultures. What are some fairy tales from your culture? What are some tales or some stories from your cultures that would match these lessons? And do a craft together, or have people share work that they're doing. I don't want to take up too much time, and I'm going to try to stop the share so that we can do this together. But as a school council, your work for the year should also be based on the school's school improvement plan, the SIP. The school is required by both the ministry and the board to have the school council be part of the writing of the SIP. Not just, here's the SIP, what do you think? Thanks very much, and go away, right? We're writing the SIP. The SIP looks at achievement, well-being, and I know I'm going to forget the third, achievement, well-being, and it's going to come to me. Anyway, there's 3 topics. And what do you see as parents and caregivers? What do you see? What are you hearing in the community? Where could there be more work, and what could you do around it? So this comes from a school. If we regularly incorporate shared reading, using culturally responsive teaching, looking at the different cultures in our school and what they do, as part of a comprehensive literacy plan, then our students will be more engaged and their reading comprehension will improve. If that is one of the goals, for example, then how can you as a council support that? How can you work with your families to get them to understand first what shared reading is, to bring some of their cultural stories and reading into the process, and to help their students to improve their reading and their comprehension. I've said that it begins with relationships, that it relies upon communication. But I want you to know that change, as Mr. Covey says, change moves at the speed of trust. And in building relationships through communication with your families will begin to trust you. You will begin to trust your families. And hopefully you will find that engagement with your families improves, and you're working together better. Now, I'm just going to try to get out of the stop share. Nope, I'm not going to be able to do it. Okay, so we'll just talk. Turn on your mics, please, if you feel comfortable doing that. And how, as I struggle to try to get my share button stopped. Ah, there we go. Hey. There we are. Okay. So first of all, I'll take any questions that you have. I'm just quickly going through okay, what questions do you have? I've kind of given you a lot. I may have disrupted some of the practices that you do or what you're used to. Just turn on your mic. There's not many of us. No questions? Trustee Mammoliti?
Yeah, I guess I want to re-engage some of the conversation that was happening in the chat, because I think that was very healthy, especially when we're looking at what Nancy's trying to share with us and breaking down some of those barriers that exist. One of the questions that was asked, or one of the statements that was made, was that we're at a model school and having a difficult time creating engagement. And one of the biggest issues we have in our system is a belief that the model school or the newcomer community is the reason why we don't have engagement. Is absolutely false. There's no truth to that at all. It's about the engagement efforts of the community to reach those people. Language, we talked about language, but it's not just language. It's about understanding the communities as a whole. So when we say pieces like we should be going to their faith institutions, I think we need to start correcting our language into our faith institutions. We have to start building the sense of community and not siloed community. And I think that creates a lot of what we're feeling right now as a system. People don't feel like they're actually part of something. They feel like they're on the outside trying to reach in, as opposed to being from the inside feeding back out. So I just wanted to share that perspective, because I saw the conversation in the chat, and for somebody like myself who represents Humber River Black Creek, which again is all model schools, that is absolute nonsense that community won't come out because of model schools. What it really means is we have to make more effort to reach those families and reach the diverse community that exists within our communities. But it can be done. It is being done in different areas. It's just a matter of the effort, and sometimes it takes more effort to be able to understand how we reach those less vocal communities, but they are there and they want to be heard. And it's important that we as a system also reflect on what they're recommending, what their conversation is, and bring back to them changes that come from the actual work we do within them. That's another big piece. We have to evidence that we're doing what we're talking about. If you talk to a community and you say, yes, we hear you, and do nothing with it, they're never going to build a sense of trust into our system. And trust is missing heavily. Sometimes it's system driven. Sometimes it comes from the environment where others are coming from. Newcomers come from different political climates. They come from different environmental climates, and that changes perspective when they're coming into a system. If you're coming from a place that has a lot of corruption in government, you're not going to listen to the government official who's standing at your door, because you have to build that trust in a new system. I know that's getting a little bit complex, but my point is, when you're talking about diversity, which is what our city represents, it means extra effort. It means doing things in many different ways to reach our community, not their community, it's our community. So I just wanted to share that piece, and thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you. I think that's really important, and I will change my language to our faith things. No, because that's an absolute powerful comment. I just want to say, for just talking specifically about model schools have community support workers, have settlement workers. Go to your community support worker and talk to them and say, listen, we've got to reach out. Where do we go? Look, every school, it doesn't matter what the makeup of the population is. Every school has leaders, right? And I'm talking outside of school council. They have the parents that everyone talks to or listens to in the grocery store, in the schoolyard, at the curb. Sometimes what you need to do is go out and find those leaders and talk to them and get them on side and say, look, this is what I'm hearing. What are you hearing from your community? What do we need to do to reach out to your community? How can we do that? And listen to them. You don't have to have school council meetings in the school. You can have school council meetings after COVID is done. You can have school council meetings in a library, in an apartment building. You'll have to have the insurance because you're off grounds, but go to them. They don't always have to come to us. And I think Trustee Mammoliti was saying, we have to, Michelle, I see you and I'm coming to you in a second. We have to recognize that not everybody's lived experience is our lived experiences, and we have to honor those. So I read, for me, it meant a lot of a principal who started at a school, and she was trying so hard to reach out, trying everything, sending everything, and there was a group of parents, they just would not come in, but she noticed them walking their kids to school, and they wouldn't even come to the school door. They would stop a couple blocks down. And she couldn't figure that out. So she left the school and she went to them and she said, why aren't you coming in? And they said, they lived in a community where people just stayed there for generations. And they said, we went to that school, it nearly killed us. And we vowed we would never go back into that school, but our kids have to go there. So that's, here we are. She needed to understand that. She needed to understand that their experiences with the system were not good. An Indigenous leader told me that, and these are things that as a white person who grew up in the system, who understands that social capital coming out my wazoo, I didn't understand it. It didn't occur to me. She said, for Indigenous families to walk in a school and see someone behind a desk can be triggering. We need to understand that not all of our families have the same experiences. And what are we going to do? And how are we going to honor that and work with them? Michelle.
Yes, so I was one that mentioned that we were in model schools. I didn't there's only so much you can really type into the chat. The reason I mentioned was, one, you already covered it, was that model school does have a CSW. So there are additional resources available to parent councils that really they should be tapping if that opportunity is there, because the CSWs can help with that connection. And also that, the designation's there because something has been identified for that school. And Trustee Mammoliti, you had mentioned from a racial perspective, the first school that we were at was actually more of a poverty perspective. And from a work perspective, most of our parents did not work a typical 9 to 5. So they were doing night shifts. They were doing, I work split shifts. I work mornings and evenings. And there was a perspective from some parents that I was a stay-at-home mom because I could be in the school, when actually I was often doing 16-hour days when you put it all together. So it was, how do you change as a council to help those who are not working that very, white centered 9 to 5 middle class not value system, but sort of what has been placed into our system,
Yeah.
And placed into our councils. And it's hard to get it across to parents when you are also across from a school that is the typical 9 to 5 base. And it's like, well, why can they have, the fun fairs and raise all this money and have all this stuff, yet my friend across the road doesn't have it?
Mhm.
And so it's, how do you also start to sort of have those conversations of the haves and the have-nots too? Like, I know some schools, I'm on the east side of Toronto, so I know like some schools along sort of beaches and Danforth area, they're doing like sponsoring schools. So a school from one neighborhood who can easily raise $30,000 in one of their events is helping and sharing that money to a school that doesn't have that. Like for the school I was in, if we raised $5,000 to be able to have the events, we would do pizza lunches so that we could have what you were talking about, the workshops coming in, the special events for parents, to have like a Zoom call or anything that we could do so just to be able to engage our families. So yeah, I mentioned it because of more of, you just have a different set of challenges. It doesn't mean that you can't overcome the challenges.
Yeah.
You just have to have a different mindset. And now that we've moved schools, still, as I said, another model school, completely different set of challenges. Because now it's as you mentioned, Trustee Mamalotti, this is now more of a racial difference. I have been told that a lot of the parents in this neighborhood have complete total trust in the administrators, and it's not their place to be involved in school. It's the teachers' jobs, it's the principals' jobs. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, how do we tell them that, no, we want your voice, and that we work together, and the more that we work together, we have the best community possible. And it's hard to talk out of the chat. So.
Those are really good points. And Trustee Mamalotti, I'll get to you in a second. I want to talk to a couple of the points there. The first, I kind of work backwards from the last thing you said. I think it's really important that we understand where our parents are sitting, when it comes to how to be engaged in their kids' learning and what their role is. And sometimes it's honoring that, but sometimes it's helping to educate them. I mentioned my friend Dr. Max Anthony Newman in Eastern Europe. It was like, you said nothing. You came in, you were told. And takes a long time to figure that out, to change that whole mindset. Just like if we moved to Czechoslovakia and we were now being told, sit, do that, what do you mean? So we have to understand that and slowly, it's not going to happen overnight. A change of thought isn't going to happen overnight. So it's just kind of listening to people and what are their expectations? What do they think should be happening? And then slowly educating them to how important it is for them to be involved. The other thing I wanted to say about working times and when you're available, absolutely, that's a problem. So what are you going to do as a council? Maybe you're not going to have your meetings at the same time, or you have your events or everything at the same time. Maybe you're going to have some in the morning, some in the afternoon, some in the evening. Maybe you're going to record them. You are allowed to record your meetings as long as that is clear to everybody who's attending that they are being recorded. But maybe you're going to have a workshop, and I want to emphasize here, workshops don't have to cost you anything, right? You got teachers in your school who have immense skill sets. They're really busy and worked really hard, but maybe you could go in with, if somebody has a camera with a video on it or an iPad or something, or the school has it, and film the teacher demonstrating how to do a math problem or demonstrating how to do reading, directed reading, and then post that on your website, so that, and then let everybody know there it's in, and they can go and they can watch it. So there's different ways of doing it, and rely on the skills in your teachers and rely on the skills that are sitting in the board, because there's the math departments, the language departments, every department is there. Rely on them. The well-being committee, they're fabulous department. The other one I want to say is, I hope everybody knows this, but I know they probably don't. Budget, write this down. budget line 41,500 is on your principal's budget line, 41,500. There is $500 sitting there for you from the ministry, and that is for parent outreach. And there is $1.25 per student, minimum $300, maximum $1,000. And that's from the board to help the school council do their operations.
Well, there's 500 on top of the 300?
Yep.
I only ever knew about the 300. Oh,
Yep.
sorry,
Yep.
what was that budget line again?
41,500. So every school council,
41,500. Okay, that was a good.
every school council is sitting there with $800 to $1,500, depending on the size of your school. You can do things without raising money.
Well, yeah, with
right.
the extra 500, it's hard on 300 once you've paid
It-
for insurance
Yep,
and everything.
it is. It is.
But with
It's really
500,
hard.
yes, we were trying
But-
to do workshops that didn't have the skills of our council or the teachers, such as Indigenous workshops. We didn't have anybody who identifies in
Okay.
that group, so it's not our place really to be speaking
No.
for them.
No.
So that's when you would be trying to bring in like
But
tribal
you
dance.
can go to the Indigenous department at the board and ask if they have anyone who could come and speak. All right?
Is
it's
Michelle
not-
Monroe the one to contact for that, or
Pardon?
would you contact Michelle Monroe, who's community engagement? to
You
help
could,
sort
her
that?
office is her office is really busy. You would go through Michelle's office for translation and interpretation services. But if you just go on the board website and search Indigenous department, something will come up.
Oh, okay. And we
Okay,
have the right to also contact them directly. It doesn't have to go through the principal.
trustee Mamalidi, do they?
Yeah, as a parent council, you're a community member. You can reach out to any member of our board at any point in time. We have a centralized Indigenous superintendent, Tanya Sank, who would be a great contact when you're looking into Indigenous initiatives. We also have a student trustee, an Indigenous student trustee in Isaiah Shafkat that we can reach out to at any point as well. And the one piece that's been missing in all of this is your trustee. You have an elected official whose intended, our purpose is to support you. If that
It's very
means
quiet.
then demand more. Reach out, keep reaching out. At the end of the day, that is our job, Michelle. Our job is to be there to support our local schools. And if that means that we have to reach out or you reach out to the trustee and ask them to connect you with X resource through the TDSB, if it's not something that we do operationally, we will put you in the right staff member that will help you get there. But throughout the whole presentation, I really want to hammer home, we are here. You're electing us. It is our job to work for you. And it's our job to build this engagement. So
I'll be honest and say I've reached out to other trustees other than my own because I know that they answer. We haven't had the best of luck with ours. I have found just even like being on Twitter, with Trustee Lynn or Trustee Doyle, I find I get a lot of information from them more than I do from my own trustee. And I'm like on their newsletters and I find out more information from them than I do from my own trustee. So yes, it would be, we'll keep pestering them.
Michelle, just to be clear, just so everybody knows, okay, trustee role, and not everybody understands this, is a part-time job. Okay?
Oh yes, yeah.
So like a lot of trustees are jumping, and I do it myself sometimes. You're being pulled in different priorities, even though you want this to be your number one priority.
And your families too.
That's it, right? And the
Yeah.
system is built that this isn't designed for a trustee to be full-time. Now, many of us do our best. And that's why I'm trying not to make it about an individual trustee, but you also have PIAC reps, and they're all elected officials. Okay, so these are all different streams you can go down to be able to be connected with resources. Even me, I'm your vice chair of the board. If you need something, never hesitate to reach out to me. Our goal is to support each other, whatever that is, however that is. Would I step on other trustees' toes? No, I wouldn't do work that belongs in their authority, but I can help. If there's areas that I can help, if there's spots that, Michelle, you're looking at and saying, from the perspective of model schools, what could we do here? Reach out to me anytime. We all look after our students as a collective.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say I'm recognizing that the time we're over. I put in the chat, you can find me on Twitter at with Equal Step, and I also put my email. So if you have any questions or things that you want some help, I have a sample parent survey that I'm happy to share. So just write me. I probably should have done something here and I forgot about it. Just write me and I'm happy to share it with you. I'll stay on if there are any questions or comments that you might have. And I want to just take this moment to thank each of you for everything you do for all of the students at your school and all of the educators and board staff at your school, the support that you give them. It's a really tough, sometimes thankless job. But I cannot emphasize to you enough how important it is for your students, for their well-being and for their ability to achieve. So thank you for all that you do and have a fun rest of the day.